Okay, in this video I'm just going to talk about the Glock trigger, how to lighten it up a little bit. It's very easy, and also how to make it a little smoother just by polishing a few parts. It's known as the 25-cent trigger job, but this is going to be more like a $30 trigger job because I replaced just a few parts inside the gun. Now, when I bought this Glock, the trigger was at 5.5 pounds, but it did feel a little heavier than 5.5 pounds. So what I did is I replaced the connector and the striker spring, or the firing pin spring, and it did lighten up the trigger, not to 3.5 pounds. I put a 3.5 pound connector in there, but it's not, the connector alone isn't going to make the trigger 3.5 pounds, because you got a couple springs in there that are a little heavier. Okay, and also I'll show you a few different areas that I polished in order to get a smoother trigger. Polishing the parts alone aren't gonna lighten the trigger. Okay, you need to replace parts for that. Polishing just makes the trigger a little smoother. It's not even really that noticeable, but maybe a little noticeable. I'm going to start on the Alright, so let me just take this. I'm gonna pour the striker spring, whatever it's called, this piece in here. Now I took the barrel and the spring out, and I'm going to use my armorer's tool to take the back plate off. This is just a Dremel attachment. I don't have an armorer's tool. You don't really need one. You can use anything. So you're going to push down on this little piece, and then the plate comes off. So let's see if I could do this here. There we go. And just be careful, because you don't want anything to come flying out at you. There we go. Take that off. And alright. Now this is your striker assembly, or firing pin assembly, whatever you want to call it. Now this is the pin that you want to replace. This is actually my new spring I bought. I got it from glockmeister.com, and it's just a little bit lighter. They said it's 1 pound lighter than the stock spring. Now this is going to help you, because when you have this in the gun, when you depress the trigger, the trigger bar comes back and it's going to push the striker back just like that. Okay, so a lighter spring is going to lighten up the trigger that much. You see? It's kind of a pain in the ass to get off, because you want to keep the striker up here, and you want to pull down the spring, and that'll take tension off of these little cups. You have 2 pieces here. You don't want to lose them, they're really small, but let's see if I could do it here. Okay, so you pull back on the spring, take these little pieces off, and this is the spring. When I got it, it's funny, because in the package it was red and brown. I thought, oh, that's different color, huh? And I took it out, and it was just covered in all types of oil and a little bit of rust in there, but I cleaned it up, and it's a regular spring. You're not really gonna worry too much about that. So I cleaned it off, sprayed it with a little bit of Rem oil, and put it back in there. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get this back together. Let's see. No, this is kind of a hassle. It's easier getting it off. Alright. Another thing I wanted to talk about, I got that back on. Another thing I wanted to talk about was a new Glock. When you get it, it's going to have all types of crap in here, all types of dry lube. It's like a copper color dry lube, and when I got it, the guy at the gun shop, he was like, you know, just that stuff is really expensive, just keep it on. And I was like, oh, you know, no problem. And I got home and I took it all off, just because when you start shooting the gun, you're cleaning it out. That stuff is gonna get removed anyways. Plus, I wanted to put my own oil in there and that sort of thing. So if you get a Glock and you see all that stuff in there, don't worry, it's normal. All right. Now, okay. There we go. Yeah, a lot of these parts are really stiff too when you first get it. Like this back plate, I had to stick a razor in there and kind of pry it open because you know the plate didn't want to slide off. Okay, so we're done with that. Now let's take a look at the trigger bar, or at the connector. It's right in here. Okay, so let me just get the. You don't have to take out the whole trigger assembly. You could just take out your back pin here and pull it up, but you wanna polish a few parts. This other side of the trigger bar I polished, so I'm gonna take the whole trigger assembly out and show you. Okay, so I took out the pins, and you pull out your locking block here, and your slide catch. Okay, take that out, and then your whole trigger assembly is just going to come right out. Okay, and here's your connector back here. You see it's not the stock connector. This is made by Ghost. This is a 3.5 pound connector. This isn't the rocket connector. I understand they make different kinds. This is the ultimate connector. It's basically the same thing. On the rocket connector, I think they had a little piece that came out here. I'm not sure. So to take off the connector, you can pry it open or pry it off, or you could just come in this other side and push it through. Alright. Now these little slots, they say are for, they're there for two reasons. I guess they're there for self-cleaning, they said on their website. I guess if there's any buildup or anything, it'll, between the trigger bar and the connector, it'll push all the crap into these slots. And also for, they got those cutouts for less contact between parts. But it doesn't really make any difference whether they're there or not. It's just a gimmick, really, so they can charge you a little more. Now the difference between this connector and the stock connector are the slots, but also this little piece on the end here is at a slight angle coming down this way, and that's going to affect the trigger bar where they meet. See, it's sliding along here, so it's going to be easier to press the trigger. It's going to be lighter. Okay. Now, once you replace that, I polished it a little bit with a Dremel, just one of the polishing attachments. You don't want to take any material off. That's another thing. You don't want to take any material off any of these parts, okay? For one thing, it's going to be pretty dangerous, you know. If, let's say you take a little bit off here, a little bit off your striker, okay? As you're pulling the trigger, it could slip off the trigger bar, okay, before you want it to. Okay, even if it's just a fraction of an inch, it could slip off there and fire the gun when you don't want it to be fired. Okay, so that's one thing to look out for. So as far as polishing is concerned, yeah, I polished this, the face, right up here. You're going to want to, I polished the side here also, because it's going to make a little contact with the frame. And, well, basically I just polished everywhere. You know, I polished up here where the striker meets the trigger bar. I polished up here where this meets the striker safety. I polished the face of the striker safety. Now, if you wanted to, and what else did I do? I polished here a little bit, but like I said, I didn't take any material off of this corner here. You don't want to do that. Now, if I wanted to lighten my trigger up even more, what I can do is replace this pin, or replace the spring in here. And what that does, you see, when you pull the trigger, this is going to make contact with this safety. Okay, so there's a little bit of resistance there. So you could lighten that. I chose not to. I didn't really want to mess around with the safety. And you can also replace the, I guess that's a trigger spring. You can put on a lighter spring if you want, but I didn't want to lighten the trigger up too much. Even though I replaced the connector and the spring in here, it's still not going to be 3.5 pounds. It's still about maybe 4.5 pounds. So if I really wanted to, I can replace those two springs and get it a little lighter, but I think it's fine the way it is, really. Okay. Now what else do I want to talk about? I also polished these rails just a little bit. I didn't use a Dremel. I just, polished them by hand. Just get them a little smoother. Also, the top of this, what the hell do you call this thing? Well, whatever the hell it's called. I noticed after firing the gun a few hundred times that this was already starting to get smoothed out over here and over here, so I just, took the Dremel and polished it. I think that's all I really did. That's all I really polished. You don't want to go too far, and to be honest with you, it's not going to make the biggest difference in the trigger pull. Like I said, it doesn't affect the strength of the trigger or the weight of the trigger, but really how the trigger feels. It is a little smoother, but it's not the biggest difference. I think a lot of people really make this change because it's, they have the gun and it's a really cheap fix or a cheap modification. They call it the 25-cent trigger job, and it costs about 25 cents. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and put this back together. Alright, so we're all done. The gun's back together. Pretty easy. It shouldn't take that long to make any changes to it. And I really hope the information helped you out. And a lighter trigger, it's not just going to make the gun more accurate, which it does, because you're putting a little less pressure on the trigger, so the gun isn't going to move over as much, or you have less of a chance of moving the gun just slightly. But also you can shoot a little faster, and it's a lot more fun. It's better to have a lighter trigger, in my opinion. So thanks for watching.